The night my daughter-in-law fainted in our living room, I was standing by the fireplace holding a remote control. My son was on his feet knocking his chair back. And every person at that Christmas dinner table had gone completely silent. I want to tell you how we got there, because it didn't start that night. It started the way most betrayals do, quietly, over months, disguised as love. My name is Douglas. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the city of Halifax, mostly on infrastructure projects, bridges, water systems, roads that outlasted the politicians who approved them. I retired 2 years ago with a full pension, some CPP savings, and a house in Bedford that my wife Annette and I bought back in 1994 when the neighborhood was still mostly young families and pickup trucks. Annette passed away from ovarian cancer in the spring of 2019. She was 61. We had been married for 38 years, and I don't think I fully understood what that meant until I was sitting in our kitchen at 7 in the morning with a full pot of coffee and no one to share it with. My son, I'll call him my son, was 32 at the time. He had married 3 years earlier, and his wife had come into the family the way some people enter a room, making sure everyone noticed. She was charming, organized, always the one who remembered birthdays and sent cards. I liked her. I thought she was good for him. I thought a lot of things back then. After Annette passed, my son started calling more often. That first winter was hard. I kept the house, kept the routines, kept driving to the gym 3 mornings a week, even though I didn't feel like it. My daughter came to visit from Vancouver in July and stayed for 2 weeks. She cried more than I did. I think she was grieving for both of us. My son and his wife lived 40 minutes away in Dartmouth. They had a nice semi-detached, 2 cars, good jobs. My daughter-in-law worked in pharmaceutical sales and was very good at it. She had the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. My son worked in IT project management, which I never fully understood, but seemed to involve a lot of video calls and spreadsheets. In early 2021, they had their first child, a boy. I drove to the hospital the day he was born and held him for 40 minutes straight. I didn't want to put him down. After that, my son started coming around more. And sometime in the late summer of that year, the conversation shifted, not suddenly, gradually, the way water carves stone. You're rattling around in that house alone, Dad. It's a lot of space for one person. Have you thought about what happens if something goes wrong and nobody's there? I told them I was fine. I was fine. I went to the gym. I had lunch twice a week with my old colleague Peter, who'd retired the year before me and had a boat he was obsessive about. I volunteered on Saturday mornings at a food bank in Sackville. I was not sitting in the dark feeling sorry for myself. But my son kept at it, and at Christmas 2021, he and his wife sat me down and proposed something formal. They wanted me to move in with them. They'd bought a larger house in Fall River, 4 bedrooms, a finished basement with a separate entrance. I could have the whole lower level to myself. It would be like my own apartment. I said I'd think about it. I thought about it for 3 months. I talked to my daughter, who was cautious. I talked to Peter, who said it sounded good on paper. I drove out to Fall River and looked at the house. The basement was genuinely nice. Full kitchen, laundry hookup, big windows facing the backyard. It wasn't a storage room. It was a real living space. What finally convinced me was my grandson. He was 18 months old by then, and he'd started walking, and I kept thinking about what it would mean to see him every day instead of every few weeks. I thought about Annette and what she would have wanted. She would have wanted me close to family. So in March of 2022, I sold the Bedford house. The market was good. After everything settled, I walked away with $412,000 after fees. My son had mentioned a few months before the sale that they had some credit card debt and a line of credit from the move that was costing them a lot in interest. He'd mentioned it the way you mentioned something you're not quite asking about. Later, after everything else happened, I realized that was the start of something deliberate. At the time, I just thought he was venting. When the house sold, I gave them $150,000. I told myself it was an early inheritance. I told myself it was what parents did when they had the means and their children needed the help. I kept the rest in a GIC and a TFSA, plus my pension and CPP. which together gave me a comfortable monthly income. I moved into the basement in April. For the first few months, it was good. I babysat when they needed me. I helped with grocery runs. I fixed things around the house. A stuck patio door, some loose deck boards, the bathroom exhaust fan that had been making a grinding noise since before I arrived. My son would come downstairs sometimes in the evenings, and we'd watch a hockey game together. Then, slowly, things began to shift. My daughter-in-law started making small comments about how much space I took up in the kitchen when I cooked, about my schedule. Did I have to leave so early in the morning? I was waking the baby. About the way I loaded the dishwasher, the shows I watched, the calls I made from the basement that she claimed she could hear through the floor even though the ceiling was fully insulated. I tried to adjust. I changed when I cooked. I started going to the gym later. I bought a pair of over-ear headphones. My son said nothing. He would look at the floor when she made these comments. I told myself he was trying to keep the peace. I told myself that was reasonable. By winter of 2023, I noticed that the invitations had become less frequent. They'd have friends over for dinner, and I wouldn't know about it until I heard voices upstairs. They started taking the baby to her parents for Christmas Eve, without mentioning it until 2 days before. Small exclusions, but they accumulated. I also started noticing my daughter-in-law's interest in my finances. It started with helpful questions. Did I have a financial advisor? Had I thought about consolidating my accounts? She mentioned that her cousin worked at a wealth management firm and could give me a consultation. I declined politely. A few weeks later, she brought it up again, framing it differently. She said that at my age, it made sense to have proper power of attorney documentation in place, just in case, she said, just in case. I nodded and changed the subject. In the spring of 2024, my son came downstairs with a stack of papers. He said he'd had them drawn up by a lawyer. Power of attorney, both financial and personal care. He said it was important, it was sensible, he just wanted to make sure things were in order. I looked at the papers. His name was listed as sole attorney on both documents. Not joint with my daughter, not with any conditions or limitations. Full authority. I told him I needed time to review them. He said, of course, take all the time I need. But something in his voice had a deadline in it. I called my daughter that night from my car, parked in the Tim Hortons lot 2 blocks away because I didn't want to be overheard. She was alarmed. She said, don't sign anything. She said she'd look into it. 2 weeks later, I called a lawyer of my own, a woman named, well, I'll just say she was thorough. I sat in her office for 2 hours, and she walked me through what those documents would have meant in practice. She told me that broad, unconditional power of attorney in a family situation where financial transfers have already occurred is a significant vulnerability. She asked me several questions I wasn't prepared for. I drove home that afternoon and sat in my car in the driveway for a long time. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the $150,000. I kept thinking about the questions she'd asked. I kept thinking about my daughter-in-law's smile when she talked about having things in order. After midnight, I got up and went to make tea. I was in the kitchen, the basement kitchen, and I heard my son and his wife talking in the hallway at the top of the stairs. The door wasn't fully closed. I don't think they knew I was awake. I wasn't trying to listen. But I heard my daughter-in-law say, he's not going to sign it voluntarily. You need to be more direct. And my son said, he'll come around. He doesn't have anywhere else to go. She said, that's not a plan. That's wishful thinking. Your sister is going to interfere. We need to move before Christmas. He said, move how? She said, the Northwood situation we looked at. It's a good facility. Once he's there, we handle the finances and we move on. People do this all the time. He's 64. He shuffles when he walks. Nobody's going to ask questions. I stood completely still. I don't shuffle when I walk. I ran a 10K in September. I went back to bed. I didn't sleep. I want to be clear about what I felt, because I've thought about it many times since. I didn't feel rage, not at first. I felt something colder than that, a kind of clarity. The kind you only get when something you half suspected becomes fully real. I spent the next 3 weeks being very normal, helpful, calm, present. I babysat on a Tuesday night when they went to a work event. I brought groceries up from the car without being asked. I said yes to every small request. And at the same time, I was working. I went back to my lawyer. I updated my will, which had not been touched since Annette died. I transferred the bulk of my TFSA into an account at a different institution, a credit union in Dartmouth, where I opened the new account with a different address, using my daughter's Vancouver address as a contact. I moved my GIC when it matured in November into the same credit union. I redirected my pension deposits. I changed my beneficiary designations. I updated the address on file with Service Canada for my CPP. Methodically. One thing at a time. Over 3 weeks, I moved every financial threat I had out of their reach. And I called my daughter. I told her everything. She booked a flight for December 23rd. The one thing I hadn't figured out was what to do with the knowledge itself. I'd thought about simply leaving, packing quietly and going to a hotel, then finding an apartment. But something in me resisted that. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was something less flattering, the desire for them to understand that I knew, that I had heard, that I was not confused, not failing, not the version of me they had been planning around. I'm not sure I'm proud of what I did next, but I'm not ashamed of it either. My son's house had a Ring doorbell and 2 indoor cameras, one in the kitchen, one in the living room. I'd helped him install them 2 years earlier. I knew the account login because he'd asked me to pull up the footage once when a package went missing. He hadn't changed the password. I accessed the footage from my phone. I looked at dates when I'd been out of the house. I found what I was looking for in mid-November. A 30-minute clip of my son and daughter-in-law sitting at the kitchen table going through printed documents together, her pointing at sections and him nodding. Financial papers, by the look of them. A folder with my name on the tab, clearly visible. And a printout from what I could just make out was a continuing care facility admission intake documents. I screen recorded the clip on my phone. I saved it to a cloud drive my daughter managed. I also found a second clip, just audio, the camera at an angle, from late October. My daughter-in-law on a phone call in the kitchen. She was talking about me. She said I seemed increasingly confused lately, and that she was concerned about his ability to make sound decisions. She said this to what sounded like her mother. The words were careful, clinical, rehearsed. She'd been practicing a narrative. I'm 64. My last cognitive assessment was part of a routine physical in August. Everything was normal. My doctor shook my hand and said, "See you next year." I kept the footage. I said nothing. December 23rd arrived, and my daughter flew in from Vancouver. She came to the house for dinner that night, and the 4 of us sat at the table together in a way that felt like a stage set. Everyone performing a role, no one saying what they were thinking. My daughter was warm but watchful. My daughter-in-law was attentive and slightly too cheerful. My son refilled everyone's water glass 3 times. Christmas Eve, I made a point of going upstairs during the day to help my son bring the extra table up from storage. We carried it together and set it up in the dining room, and for a moment it felt like something real, just father and son doing a practical thing together. And I almost said something. I almost gave us a chance to step out of what was coming. I didn't. Christmas Day. Her parents arrived at noon. My daughter was already there. We had 7 people at the table, 8 counting my grandson in his high chair at the corner. My daughter-in-law had done most of the cooking, roast turkey, stuffing, roasted vegetables, a trifle for dessert. It was genuinely good. I told her so. After the meal, before dessert, I stood up. I said, "Before we get to the trifle, I'd like to show everyone something. A sort of Christmas gift." My son looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, uncertain, half smiling. I walked to the television and connected my phone. I had the clips queued up. I pressed play. It was the November footage first. 48 seconds. The 2 of them at the kitchen table with my documents. The folder with my name on the tab. The intake papers for the care facility. No narration needed. Then the audio clip, her voice patient and deliberate, describing a 64-year-old man who was losing his clarity and not capable of managing his own affairs. Her mother said, "Audrey, that's my daughter-in-law's name." Audrey. She had gone white. Completely white. Completely white. And then she stood up from her chair and she sat back down, and then she stood up again and her knees buckled and her father caught her by the arm, and she sort of collapsed sideways into her chair. Her mother was saying something. My son had both hands pressed flat on the table. My daughter was watching me. I turned off the television. I said calmly that I had already taken care of my financial matters, that the power of attorney documents my son had presented me with had been reviewed by a lawyer and would not be signed, that my will, my accounts, and my pension arrangements had all been updated, that I had consulted with the City of Halifax Pension Office, with my bank, and with my own legal counsel over the past several weeks. I said that I was leaving the basement suite on the 27th. I had already put a deposit on an apartment in the north end of Halifax, a one-bedroom on the 7th floor with a view of the Arm. I said that the $150,000 I had given them I considered a gift, and I would not be seeking it back, but I said it so they understood I had considered it. I said I hoped that someday my son and I might find a way forward from this. I told him I loved him. I said it looking directly at him. He didn't say anything. I picked up my grandson from a high chair, and I held him for a while against my chest, the way I had in the hospital on the day he was born. He patted my shoulder with one hand, the way babies do when they don't know what else to offer. Then I set him down and went downstairs. The 27th came. I loaded my things into my car and my daughter's rental, and we drove 2 loads to the apartment. She stayed 3 more days to help me get settled. We assembled furniture from IKEA and argued about where the bookshelf should go and ordered pizza and watched an old movie she remembered from childhood that I barely remembered and she said I used to love. Maybe I had. On New Year's Day, I put on my running shoes and did 5 kilometers along the waterfront. It was cold and bright, and the harbor was that deep gray blue it gets in January. A few other people were out. A woman with a yellow Labrador who lifted one paw to me in greeting. I thought about Annette. I thought about what she would say. I think she would have a lot to say, and most of it would be unprintable. Then she would make tea, and we would sit in it together, the way we always did, and eventually she would say, "You did what you could." I'm still going to the gym 3 mornings a week. I had lunch with Peter last Tuesday. He wants to take his boat out in the spring, and he wants me to come. I said yes. My daughter calls every Sunday. We talk for a long time, sometimes about nothing at all, which is its own kind of gift. My son called once, in January. He said, "I need to explain some things, Dad." I said, "I know you do." I said I wasn't ready yet, but that the door wasn't closed. I meant it. I don't know how that story ends. Some things don't resolve cleanly. What I know is that I'm the one writing it, and I intend to keep writing it for a long time yet. 64 isn't old. I ran a 10K in September, and I have every intention of running another one in the spring. I've been sitting with this for a few months now, and I still don't have a clean way to wrap it up. Real things rarely wrap up cleanly. What I keep coming back to is this. The plan my son and Audrey had wasn't born overnight. It was built slowly, the way bad things usually are. One small justification at a time, one quiet conversation, one folder with a tab that had my name on it. They didn't wake up one morning as villains. They made a series of choices, each one a little further from honest, until they were sitting at a kitchen table going through intake papers for a care facility for a man who had just run a 10K in September. That's what I want people to understand. It's rarely a sudden fall. It's a gradual one, and the same is true in the other direction. My way out wasn't one dramatic moment either, even though it looked like one from the outside. Every step I took in those 3 weeks, the lawyer, the credit union, the redirected pension, the cloud drive, the phone call to my daughter, each one of those was a small decision made clearly, quietly, without anyone knowing. I think that's what I'm most proud of, if I'm being honest, not the Christmas dinner moment. That was just the last step. What I'm proud of is that I didn't panic. I didn't confront them in a rush of emotion and give them time to maneuver. I didn't sign documents I didn't understand. I thought. I moved carefully. I protected myself the way I wish someone had told me years ago that a person might need to. Because here's the thing, nobody tells you when you're in your 60s and you've just lost your wife and you love your grandchild and you want to believe that your family is fundamentally good, wanting something to be true doesn't make it true. I wanted to believe the move to Fall River was about family. I wanted to believe my son's concern was concern. I held on to that longer than I should have, because the alternative was painful. But the longer you hold on to a false version of something, the more it costs you in the end. Audrey said on that recording that I seemed increasingly confused. I've thought about that phrase a lot. I think what she meant was that I wasn't doing what she expected, that I asked questions, that I didn't sign things immediately, that I had a lawyer look at documents. In her version of events, those were signs of confusion. In mine, they were signs of paying attention. Pay attention. That's the whole lesson, really. Not to cynicism. I don't think you should walk through your life suspicious of everyone who loves you, but pay attention to what's actually happening alongside what you're being told is happening. Those two things are not always the same. And when they start to diverge, trust what you see over what you're being asked to feel. My daughter calls every Sunday. Peter wants to take his boat out when the weather turns. I have an apartment on the 7th floor with a view of the Arm. I ran 5 kilometers on New Year's Day in the cold. 64. I'm 64 years old. And I intend to be a very inconvenient man for a long time yet.